I'm excited about week 3 of Kill the Giant as we're looking at the greatest underdog story ever told of David and Goliath. The story of this little shepherd boy who's able to go out and defeat this mighty man. Spoiler alert, David wins. Can I tell you that God has created you to be a winner? That whatever's opposing you, it's even though it looks bigger, it's not. You can have victory in whatever issues you're facing in life because this is how good our God is. And if you weren't here, let me catch you up on the story. So David is just a shepherd boy out in the pasture, taking care of some sheep, and unbeknownst to him, a prophet shows up in his town and starts talking with his dad. And his dad says, one of your sons is going to be the next king of Israel. Bring all of your sons so I can meet him. So Jesse, David's dad, brings his 7 sons to meet the prophet, but doesn't bring his 8th son, David. The prophet looks at all the 7 sons and says, nope, 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 all the way down the line, and asks Jesse, don't you just have one other son? He says, yeah, I've got the runt of the litter. I've got little David. He's out in the field, and he says, well, send him an Uber and get him over here. And so they get David into the place, and the prophet looks at David and says, this is the next king of Israel. He pours out some oil and anoints him to be the king. But then after that, David just goes back to the pasture. You see, sometimes you got to spend time in the pasture before you can get to the palace. You've got to have a time of serving before you can step into all that God has for you. And David, he finds himself in this weekend gig playing music for King Saul. King Saul's kind of stressed, and so he wants some harp music. Right? So David's playing the harp on the weekends for the king. And so during the week, he's watching the sheep. On the weekends, he's playing for King Saul. He finally gets a day off. And when he gets a day off, he gets a phone call. You know how that works? You finally get a day off, and then you got some other errand to go and run. And so his dad says, hey, David, I need you to take some food to your brothers who are in King Saul's army. So he goes home, and his dad has a bunch of Lunchables for him, and he takes these Lunchables out, and he goes to deliver those to his brothers on King Saul's front lines. And when he gets there, he looks across the valley, and he sees Goliath. He sees the giant. He sees this mighty warrior. Last week, we got into some detail about the giant, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and so I know all about Andre the Giant. My boy Andre the Giant was 7'4". He's a massive human being, but Scripture tells us that Goliath was 9'9", way bigger than Andre the Giant. And so David looks out and he sees this giant who's 700 pounds. He's wearing 225 pounds of armor. He has a 13-foot spear to kill somebody with. That seems pretty scary to me. But not only is he big and intimidating, but for 40 days he's been shouting, defying the armies of Israel. And so we've got my giant mic set up so that you can hear what a giant sounds like. Are you ready?
So, the giant Goliath was opposing God's people.
It's my favorite thing ever. I'm going to just start working this into every sermon I ever preach.
And he's on the hill saying, send me a man to come down and fight me. And if he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves.
Come on, somebody. And so the giant is on the hillside shouting, defying things against David, against God, against King Saul. And David's standing there going, why won't somebody fight this guy? He starts to talk about it, and as he does, he hears some men talking about what the king has promised the man who would kill Goliath. Because who knows that there's blessing associated with your obedience? Who knows that when you actually decide to fight the giant in your life, that God has some promise for you, that God has a reward for you. So the reward that David hears is that the king is going to make the man rich, that the king is going to allow him to marry one of his daughters, and that he's going to give that man and his whole family exemption from taxation. Come on now, right? And that's a good one. And so not only is David going to be blessed, but his future children are going to be born into royalty, and his father and everyone in his house is going to find freedom. And so moms and dads, when you fight your giant, it affects your children. When you fight your giant, it affects everybody who's relationally connected to you because they need something after you find your victory. And so David, he's hearing this story. You ready to pick up where we are in the story? So David's at the battle line, and he hears the reward. And it says this, verse 26, David asked the soldiers standing nearby, what will the man get for killing the Philistine? And they tell him, verse 28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him. So Eliab is in King Saul's army, and he hears his little brother showing up with a handful of Lunchables, and he gets mad at him. Who do you think you are, David? You little punk. How dare you even come down here? Have you ever had somebody get mad at you just for dreaming? Yes. Have you ever had somebody look down on you just because you said, man, maybe I could do something great? This is what David is experiencing. Eliab, and he goes on, he says, why have you come down here? You don't even belong here. You don't even deserve to be in our ranks. You need to get up out of here, you little kid. And he says, and with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? He doesn't just say, who did you leave your sheep with? Who did you leave your few sheep with? He's talking down to David. He's telling David, hey, I know that you're not just a shepherd, you're just a scrub shepherd. You only got like 3 scraggly sheep, not like in the big flock, but out in the middle of the wilderness. Have you ever had someone talk down to you? Make you feel like you don't matter, that you don't have what it takes? His brother goes on and says, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, this is his brother. Right. And what I've learned in my life is sometimes the greatest pains come from those that we love the most. That the people that we love the most are the ones whose words seem to be the sharpest. David came to serve them, but again, they hit him with some judgment and some words. And Eliab, he attacks his heart. He says, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. Right. David's heart is the thing that set him apart. Right. The reason that God chose David was because of his heart. It says this in 1 Samuel 13. Now, the story that we're in is chapter 17. So just a few chapters before, God tells the prophet what kind of man he's looking for. He says this, the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler. Right. It was David's heart that made him the thing that God was looking for. Can I tell you that people in your life will try to attack the very thing that God loves most about you? It's true. That thing that people are talking down on is the gift that God put inside of you to use you to do something great. And this is what Eliab is doing. It's your most valuable thing, you know, your heart. The Bible says that above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. The way that you love your spouse flows from your heart. The way that you raise your kids, it flows from your heart. It's all out of your emotions. It's all out of what you feel. The way that we worship God, it flows out of our heart. So we have to guard it from bitterness, or else we'll grow up corrupting many people around us. And so Eliab starts to attack his heart. And then he goes on and he says, and you came down only to watch the battle. Wow. Just to watch it, just to watch it, just to watch it. Eliab is saying, you're only here to watch. Right. I think it's because he was nervous because he really knew who his brother was. Right. Eliab grew up in the same house with his brother. He knew David was ready to drop. He knew he was scrappy. He knew he was willing to fight. And if David says, I'm going to fight the giant, Eliab knew. Right. So he's trying to prophesy into David that he's not going to fight, but just watch. Can I ask you? Don't allow the wrong people to prophesy into your destiny. Don't let the wrong people have a voice in what your next steps are. Because they're going to try to say, man, you're just going to watch. You're not going to do nothing. You all talk. Just stand over here and talk, David. But David says, no, I have something great inside of me. But look at what David does, 1 Samuel 17:29. So David picks up a sword and stabs Eliab in the eye. Is that what it says? Oh, that's not what he did. That's what I would have wanted to do. I'd have wanted to give him a knuckle sandwich with some cheese on it, right? I wanted to deal with Eliab. But look at what David says. Eliab's talking all kind of junk, and David says, now what have I done? What have I done, man? He said, can't I even speak? He doesn't get into a fight with Eliab. He disarms the situation. He doesn't throw a bucket of gas on it. He throws a bucket of water on it. And he says, hey, man, can I even, I'm just talking here. Eliab, why are you getting all riled up, bro? Can I even talk? You see, the reason he doesn't fight Eliab is because Eliab can't actually help him get to the giant. Right. Eliab doesn't have the authority to let David do the thing that he feels called to do. So there's no reason to pick a fight with that guy. Verse 30, then he, David, turned away from Eliab to someone else and brought up the same manner, and the men answered him as before. He turned away. You see it? He's talking to Eliab, big old older brother Eliab. Eliab's talking noise. David disarms the situation, and he turns. He turns. Sometimes we have to make an intentional relational turn. That the people that are talking down to us and saying that we can't do the things God called us to do, we have to turn from them. And then what David does is he steps into a new circle. He steps into a new group of men, and he's not deterred. He says the same thing. Sometimes what can happen when someone talks down to us is we shift our vision for ourselves. We think, well, man, they said I couldn't do it. So instead of saying 100% confidence, I'm going to walk to these new people with only 20% confidence. Well, man, I don't know. He's a pretty big giant. He's a pretty big guy. No. David is not shaken. David walks with the same authority because he knows how big his God is. It doesn't matter how big Goliath is. It doesn't matter how tall he is and how much armor he has. David was willing to fight him because his perspective was that God was bigger than the giant. And so he turns from Eliab, and he finds a new circle. Let me ask you a question. Who do you need to turn away from? Who are the voices that you need to turn away from? Who are the people that are speaking negatively over you, that are causing you an issue to step into all that God has for you? I don't got time. We've got to be intentional to make some shifts. Watch what happens when David gets in the new circle. Verse 31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. When he got in this new circle, somebody believed in what David was saying. You see, the problem is that Eliab only saw David for the little runt in the field. Sometimes the people that have known you for a long time don't understand who you are now. They knew who you were back when, but they don't understand who you are now. You living for Jesus now. You changed your life. You lead your wife differently. You lead your husband differently. You handle your finances, your children differently. And so they talk to you like you a little boy from the hood, like you some little boy that lived out in the field, and now you got to find a new circle who understands the warrior that you are. And so because this new circle understood who David was, they go and tell King Saul, King Saul, there's some dude out here, that harp player that you know, he said he's going to go fight Goliath. And Saul's like, say what? I've been waiting 40 days for somebody to fight this joker. Get him in here. Let's bring him in. What David said was overheard and reported to King Saul, and Saul sent for him. So he's brought into the presence of the king because he didn't get in a fight with his brother. If David would have got mad at Eliab and started rolling around and scrapping and having some ground and pound action on Eliab, he would have never been allowed permission to go and talk to the king. Because everybody would have been focused on this fight instead of focused on the other fight. What I know in my situation is that there's always a fight before the fight. There's always something that comes along that tries to get my focus looking at something else. Sometimes we don't even have the opportunity to fight the fight that God calls to fight because we're so busy fighting over stupid stuff. Who cares what Eliab says? There's a 9-foot-tall giant that needs to get dealt with. We don't get to fight the fight because we caught up fighting a fight that we shouldn't be fighting. There's always a fight before the fight. There's always a battle before the brawl. There's always a clash before the combat. Come on, somebody. There's always a dispute before the duel. Can I keep going? There's always a rivalry before the riot. There's always a struggle before the skirmish. I'm working that thesaurus, right? There's always a fight before the fight. And that fight before the fight is trying to steal your focus. The enemy wants to steal your focus, because if he can get you to forget about Goliath and start fighting your brother, you won't actually have any advancement. You won't actually accomplish everything that God has for you. David has been faithful and faithful and faithful, but he's in this destiny-defying moment, but there's a distraction. Sometimes the fight before the fight that steals your focus involves your family. Sometimes your family, those that are closest to you, are the ones that are distracting you from doing the things that God has called you to do. We can spend so much time fighting with people on our side of the battle line that we never get to deal with a giant. You remember the picture? I shared it last week. The Israelites are on one hill. The Philistines are on the other hill with a valley in between them. And David is about to get into a fight with a guy on his side of the battle line. And if we spend all of our time fighting each other, we don't actually fight the devil. And I don't just mean your blood family. I mean those that are closest to you. Sometimes we get so caught up fighting our own friends that we can't even make an advancement in our life. We get so caught up fighting with our mom or fighting with our dad or fighting with our kids or fighting with our spouse that we don't ever make any advancement against the giant who's been taunting us for 40 days. Rachel and I will get into an argument, And I learned a trick a long time ago to help us get through that thing. Is if we're sitting at the table, I'll pick up a salt shaker and I'll put the salt shaker in the middle of the table. I'll say, hey, baby, we're not fighting with each other. We're fighting this. Right. We're talking about our finances. We're talking about our children. We're talking about this thing going on at the church. I know that it's bringing tension into our home, but I'm not fighting you and you're not fighting me. We're fighting this thing. If we're in the living room, Rachel will literally grab a pillow and she'll throw it in the middle of the living room floor and she'll say, hey, Truston, I'm not fighting with you. I'm fighting with this thing. And I say, I'm sorry for my attitude, baby. She says, I'm glad you're sorry for your attitude, baby. I'm just kidding. Rachel's super humble, and so she'll say, I'm sorry, I'm not fighting with you. But what we have to do is realize that there's no reason for us to fight each other. There's an external giant who's taunting us. You know, I think that one of the reasons that churches stop growing is because people in the church get so caught up fighting with each other that they stop fighting the giant. Years ago, church splits happened all across America because pastors wanted to remove organs from the stage and replace them with electric guitars and drums. And so people were so married to the model that they forgot about the mission. And so they said, I can't believe Pastor took an organ off the stage. That is sacrilegious. I'm leaving the church. There's no organ in the Bible. They're playing flutes and harps and a bunch of weird instruments that I don't see none of those up here. We don't need to be married to the method, but we are married to the mission. But sometimes church people can get kind of catty with each other and start fighting about things. Can I just tell you, it's not about none of that. If I want to change the carpet to pink, because I think that more people are going to be reached by Jesus if the carpet's pink, we're changing the carpet to pink. And if you don't like about it, you got to check your heart and understand that the carpet doesn't really matter. This is the only thing that matters. This is all that matters. And so as long as this doesn't change, we've got to remember to stop fighting with each other. We don't have no problems. Living church is good. I just want to be here for a long time. And I don't want to be a 60-year-old man with a church bunch of bickering going on. So I'm dealing with it now, before it even starts. That we're not going to fight with each other. We got a devil to fight, and he's big enough to handle. 1 Samuel 17:31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. So he's now standing before the king of Israel. Verse 32, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. But what David doesn't know is Saul already lost heart. Because in verse 11, it says that Saul heard the shouts of Goliath and was deeply shaken. Saul was already shook in his heart. Saul was already overwhelmed and intimidated. So look at how Saul responds. Verse 33, Saul replied, you are not able. You can't do it. Who do you think you are? You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth. David, you are not able. The enemy is bigger. You can't, he can. You'll lose, he'll win. David had 2 fights before he even met Goliath. He had to deal with the fight of Eliab, and now he's fighting King Saul. The problem is he can't throw a rock at either of them. He can't deal with that way. He's got to stay cool. He's got to stay calm. He's got to keep it collected. He has to understand that he can't fight Eliab and Saul because they weren't the real enemy. Saul's not the real enemy, even though Saul's talking down to him. Eliab's not the real enemy because he's talking down to him. But the question that I ask is, why is Eliab so mad? Why is Saul so bent out of shape? Why is Saul so negative? Why do people talk down to us? Why do some people talk down to me? Why do some people talk down to you? Well, when I look at the story, maybe it's because they're the ones who should have been fighting Goliath first. Saul has been on the battle line for 40 days along with Eliab, and neither of them fought the giant. So now when someone shows up willing to fight the giant, they start talking junk. Goliath is a huge guy, right? 9'9". If you've got a giant to fight, you're going to pick your biggest man to go and fight him. If the Big Show, any wrestling fans in the house? If the Big Show walks out, you're not looking for Rey Mysterio. NBA, I'll take it there. If Shaquille O'Neal wants to fight somebody, you don't look for Muggsy Bogues. Come on now. You want a big man versus a big man. So they've got 9-foot-tall Goliath. So I would think that they would try to find the biggest guy in Israel. You know who it is? Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, I read this week 1. Saul was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. So if the tallest guy in the land is 6'8", Saul is 1.5 feet to 2 feet taller than that guy. Saul is a giant himself. So Saul, for 40 days, all of the men have been going, well, come on, king, let's get it. What you standing around for? But Israel has another giant on their side, and the other big man, his name is Eliab. In 1 Samuel 16:6, the Bible talks about how Samuel walked in and he sees the oldest son of Jesse, and he says, surely this is the Lord's anointed. But God says to the prophet, no, don't look at his height. Don't look at his power. Don't look at his stature. Eliab was the second giant of Israel. And so Eliab is mad at David for even assuming that he could fight the giant, because for 40 days a bunch of people have been looking at Eliab going, come on, bro. You so big and you bad. You 7'5". What's up, dude? Go fight Goliath. You younger than him anyways. Go and fight somebody. So maybe the reason that they were mean to David was because they were afraid to do the thing that they should have already done. Sometimes the reason that someone who should be your brother fights you is because they're insecure that you're doing it better than they did. Because they were unwilling to fight their giant, they don't want you to fight your giant. Misery loves company. And so because I didn't succeed, I don't want you to succeed, so I'm going to start to talk down to you. Sometimes those in positions above you, the reason they don't support you is because they see the gifts that are in you, and they're intimidated by you. And so they're going to start talking down to who you actually are. Maybe your mom is rude to you because you're doing a better job than she did. Right? Maybe your boss is mean to you because he's afraid of the gifts that are in you. Maybe the reason that your brother is a jerk is because your brother really knows your heart and knows that you have something great inside. I experienced this as a pastor, that as Living Church grows, I meet pastors and engage with different leaders, and they start to look down and to speak down on me because they're scared of how many giants we're killing at Living Church. And they don't know what to do. And so they start going to say, man, I don't understand. I had a pastor not too long ago say, Pastor Truston, man, we're excited about everything happening at Living Church. We're going to believe in you and support you until your church has one more member than mine. And I about threw up on the dude's shoes. Like, there are 68,000 people in the city of Mansfield that need to know about Jesus. We are not in competition with each other, bro. We need to be in unity to reach more people. But sometimes, when people don't kill a giant in their generation, they speak down to the young buck who's coming in and doing something. And so we have to not listen to those voices and know that God has something great for us. Good God. Just because somebody else is unwilling to fight theirs, don't run away from yours. Just because they didn't take advantage of their opportunity doesn't mean that you should let them discouraging you from taking advantage of your opportunity. Maybe the reason someone is telling you that you can't is because they didn't. Think about the voices. Think about the hurtful things that have been said to you. What's the source? What's the source? Why are they saying those things? Are they saying those things based in truth, or are they saying those things based in their own failure and insecurity? Most of the people who have told me I couldn't is because they didn't. Every time you're ready to advance yourself, somebody comes along and says, who are you? Man, who are you? Who are you to start going to church? Who are you to lead a life group? Who are you to be a prayer partner? Who are you to post on social media something about Jesus or his church? Who are you to do that? I knew you back when. I knew you when you was Jenny from the block. She was still Jenny from the block at the Super Bowl party. Almost had to resign the next day, right? Still Jenny from the block. I knew you when you was back in the field. I knew you when you was up in the club. I knew you back when. Who do you think you are? They were attacking David because of their own insecurity. The only reason someone says, who do you think you are, is because they're insecure about who they are. They have some insecurity about who they are, so they're trying to downplay who you are. But thankfully, what David understood was that they were under attack too. Was that Saul and Eliab were under the same intimidation that he was experiencing. But while I'm on it, we have to be intentional to not become somebody else's Eliab. We have to be careful to not become somebody else's Saul. We have to be very aware that it can be easy for us to see advancement in others and start to get intimidated by their growth. So hey, saints that have been loving Jesus for a long time, There's people getting saved here at Living Church. And they're getting Jesus into their heart and Jesus into their life. And if they surpass you up in your leadership, that's not on them, that's on you. So let's not look down on people that are coming in and going, man, they've only been saved 3 months. That don't matter. You can be real far from God and real close to Him real fast because of how good our Father is. And so we have to be an encouraging church. My hope and prayer is that as I get older, that someday when I'm 70 and 75-year-old man and I come into Living Church and nobody even know who I am, that I don't sit in the seat and watch the new person who's speaking and sit there and think, man, I was better than that. I want to be an encourager of the next generation. I want to be a champion for people that are following behind and not allow the spirit of Saul to settle in and the fear of Eliab to get in my heart and to not push people forward. The reason that David was able to not fight with Saul and David is because he understood they were under an attack. You see, the truth is, you've heard it said before, hurt people hurt people. So maybe the reason the people that have hurt you is because they were hurt. But you know what else is true? Scared people scare people. People that live in fear, and they're afraid all the time, they start to say things, yeah, but what if this happens? What if you step out and do what God says, and then this situation hits your life? Scared people, they scare people. Weak people project weakness on people. If they were afraid to fight the giant, they're going to tell you not to fight yours. So we have to be aware of the reality of who's giving us the advice. So David's at this moment to get in this fight with a giant, just like we are. We're in giant killing season here at Living Church. We're in a season, I'm not riding the pony, right? I'm working my sling. I just realized I look like Genuine up here. So, oh God, help me, Lord. We're in giant killing season, somebody. We got to sling that rock and kill some giants. 1 Samuel 17:33. Saul says this, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight the Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy. And he's been a man of war since his youth. But it says this, verse 34, but David persisted. David kept on. David didn't get scared. David just kept telling himself, don't stop believing. Hold on to the fear. Hey, come on and on. Right? David says, don't stop believing. David persisted. David didn't change his tune when someone gave him opposition. David goes on and he says this, I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. He said, when a lion or a bear came to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. Come on, somebody. Catch that joker by the jaw and beat him to death. He says, I have done this both to lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claw of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine as well. He says, I've already done this. King Saul, I already been there and done that and got the t-shirt. I've already killed some big stuff. So I'm not scared of Goliath. David's power was in his testimony. Your power is in your testimony. This is about to be a good place to amen. Has God ever done something for you? Has God ever done something for you? If God set you free last time, He's going to bring you victory this time. That if God forgave you of your sin back there, He's going to set you free up here. That if God provided for you before, why would we doubt that He would provide for us again? That if God healed you last time, He's going to bring healing this time. If God made a way for you yesterday, He's going to make a way for you tomorrow. Because you see, God always acts within the consistency of His character. Let me say it again. God always acts within the consistency of His character. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. This is who our God is. If He gave you peace last time, baby, you're going to get through it this time. I know your marriage looks like it's about to fall apart, but remember He did a miracle for you when you were 12 years old. He hasn't forgotten about you. This is who our God is. If the Lord rescued you from that, He's going to rescue you from this. If He did it last time, He's going to be consistent. He's going to do it this time. David already killed a bear? A bear. I looked it up this week to see what kind of bears were over there. Eurasian bears in that part of Israel would grow to 1,000 pounds and 8 feet tall. 1,000 pounds. Their skull is 1.5 inches thick of bone. They have razor-sharp teeth and 4-inch claws on each hand. The reason that David had the confidence to fight Goliath is because he had a bearskin rug on the floor of his house. He had already killed something big. And so we have to understand that God is with us, that he's for us, that he's not against us. Come on, Living Church. You've got to get some fire shut up in your bones and look at that giant and say, giant, I'm not scared of you because I've already had victory. And God's going to bring a victory into my life. Verse 34. Let me explain. Listen to how many times David says I. How many times he talks about himself. When a lion or bear came to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lion and bear, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. We have to take a step towards victory. I think that sometimes Christians can just think that all I have to do is pray. You got to pray, but faith without works is dead. Sometimes we've got to take a step into the thing that God's called us to do. What's the step you need to take to kill your giant? Do you need to call a counselor? Is it time? Is it time to call a counselor? You've been hearing me talk about it for 2 years, but is it time to take the step? Is it time for you to talk to a pastor? Is it time for you to go to a life group? Is it time for you to write a letter to someone who died and isn't even alive anymore and forgive them just because you've got to get it out of your heart? Is it time? Is it time to apologize to somebody that you hurt? Is it time? Is it time to take the step? What's the step that you have to take? But it's a lot easier to take those steps when you know that God's going to bring the victory. Because David says this next in verse 37, the Lord who rescued me. I, the Lord rescued me. I, the Lord rescued me. Sometimes we just have to take a step and a step and a step, and it's a lot easier to take those when we know that God's going to rescue us in the long run. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm afraid of. I got a lot of stuff that intimidates me in life. But when I know that God's going to be the one to bring me victory again, it's easier to charge into all that God has for us. Would you stand up with me this morning? I want to pray over you and your giant. God's the one who brings victory. He won't abandon you. He won't forsake you. He won't let you charge your giant and let you get your butt kicked. God's going to show up in mighty power and bring you victory. If you've got a giant in your life that you need to kill, would you just put your hand up? I got both hands and a foot. If you've got a giant, Father, you see your people. You see your Davids whose hearts are willing and open to receive something from you. And Father, I pray that you would fill us with the confidence, not in this moment, but in Monday morning moments, to know that we can charge the things that have been intimidating us. God, that no longer would the enemy shout and scare and intimidate us, but Father, that we would believe that if you are with us, who can be against us? That no weapon formed against us shall prosper because you're with us. So this morning you might feel surrounded and overwhelmed, but how we fight our battles is in our mouth. I'm going to talk about that in 2 weeks, that the victory is won in the words that we speak. So come on, sing.